family going wandering off into distance there. That's called Hi. Breakfast show time. We are 28 minutes, almost exactly, after the hour of 8 o'clock. It is that time of the week. We check in with Dr. Computer, Alex Newman. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Jerry. How are you doing today?
I'm surviving, I think.
Okay.
Let me check. Not doing too bad. You?
I'm doing pretty well, fortunately. A lot of work, which is always good. I always say that the the alternative would not be as fun. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely happy about that and happy to be here helping everybody, deal with all of these tech problems that nowadays we have with, everything digital being such a part of our life right now. Oh, and speaking of digital life, by the way, remember I was Alex Newman on Twitter and then Vida Digital on everything else?
Right.
Well, I'm finally Vida Digital on Twitter. I finally got whoever was holding on to that name for the last 12 years and wasn't using it to hand it over. So I'm now Vida Digital on all the social media if you want to
Okay,
follow.
that's good. Had that person tried to extract money from you for the use of it?
I'd rather not say because I don't want to get mad about it. But yeah, that unfortunately, well, I did have to part, with some resources to get it. But yeah, I finally got it, and I'm happy to have Vida Digital on all the networks, including TikTok and Instagram and OnlyFans and everything else. So, uh,
Okay, good. So you're not Alex Newman anymore.
oh, I still am, but I tweet under Alex Newman, personal stuff or whatever, and just focus on the technology and everything else on Vida Digital. So that's going to be interesting.
Oh, excellent. Good. And talking about everything else, I mean, the reason you sort of sent a note yesterday and said, what could we talk about? And I think one of the things that has sort of come up, and people probably think, well, that's not going to affect me. And that's when we have sort of basically one of the new weapons in modern warfare are cyber attacks.
Yeah,
And, to say, okay, well, um, they'll go for sort of really sort of infrastructure. And that includes, no doubt, banking. And it could affect you.
yeah, banking or hospitals or
Or water.
schools or pipelines.
Uh-huh.
Or, I mean, remember back when that pipeline in the east coast of the US
That's
was
right.
knocked
Uh-huh.
offline?
Uh-huh.
Of course, the bigger damage was done by the people who went out and filled, like, every plastic container they had in their home with gasoline, and it ran out, not because there was a cyber attack, because that had been dealt with, but just by the scarcity generated by the panic buying. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
remember that when you're buying toilet paper next time. But speaking of toilet paper shortages, one of the things that kind of made cybercrime and cyber attacks and so on have a very interesting surge was back at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and all throughout 2021, everything that has to do with COVID. I mean, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
fake emails going around
Right.
saying, click here to get the latest information, or to, subscribe to updates, or even, people pretending to be like helping others register for vaccines and things like that. I mean, a lot of crime went up almost 600%, according to some studies in that regard. Also, a lot of people working from home and a lot of people working in like weird hybrid schedules or whatever also put a strain on the network infrastructure. I mean,
Right.
a lot of the times network providers had a certain idea of how much use they were going to get out of like home internet networks, because a lot of people were in the daytime just, at their place of business and not at home. But the added amount of people in home networks added to the strain. And not only that, a lot of these people usually don't care or don't bother to do things like update your router to avoid
Right.
things like vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities in a lot of devices played a major role last year as well, in facilitating these kind of cyber attacks, not only on people's homes, but also small businesses and local governments with small budgets that don't necessarily take care of cybersecurity as much. And they became the biggest targets for cyber attackers because they can be used in many ways for identity theft, for ransomware, or for distributed denial of service attacks. If you take over enough computers, you can make them attack somebody else in your name and take down valuable infrastructure, which is something that a lot of people have been looking at in the past 3 or 4 weeks because of what's going on in Ukraine, for example. A lot of the infrastructure has been targeted. And with what something that's also interesting, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure in Russia was attacked, and it was showing, and the gas pumps were attacked. They were showing messages in support of Ukraine, and you're not going to get any gas from here, and so to you, Russian warship, which it has been something of a war cry for people fighting back. So there's a lot of that going around, and we need to be really careful because anything can happen. As you say, you think it might not affect me, but it might as well, because it affects infrastructure that you're depending on, or it can affect your livelihood. If, for example, something that you use for cloud services or whatever gets knocked out. iCloud was offline for a couple of hours, a couple of times.
Quite a few of their services were offline for a couple of days.
When Apple Books and Apple Music went down, not a lot of people noticed, but because everybody's on Spotify, but nobody reads books anymore. But yeah, I mean, they were affected, and it could happen. I mean, I think you might remember when Microsoft's services were down for a couple of days, and Amazon's services were down for a couple of hours, affecting other things. And I mean, it could be that, for example, you have your website hosted at Amazon and there's an outage at Microsoft or Google, but your payment processor, your payment gateway is on their servers.
Exactly.
So you have a working website, but no way to get paid. So I think one of the biggest things that enterprises need to start thinking about is, look at every single piece of the infrastructure picture and see what you can do to be more cyber resilient.
With these attacks, I mean, we're getting the point. What exactly could, say, a service provider, a big service, say a water supplier, or like I say, the banks, how do they protect themselves? Because the hackers know what they're doing. They know the way in.
There are several ways. One of the ways that these companies can prepare is to have what's called a disaster recovery planning, action. When you have disaster recovery planning, you plan for the worst and then you prepare for it, so that when that happens, you can go back online. I was reading about a company in Brazil, for example, the other day that had a ransomware attack. And they were out for, I think, 4 days or something like that. And since Brazil, it's kind of its own planet. I mean, it's got so many people and so many companies, and it's such a big, huge economy. It's almost a continent in and of itself. I mean, they lost hundreds of millions of dollars in profits because they couldn't do business for that time. So I think one of the first things that companies need to do is do some disaster recovery planning. And while it is true that having good firewalls and good antivirus and all that is really important and should not be set aside in any way, the new frontier for cyber attackers right now is users' identity. Because if I get access to your account, it doesn't matter what kind of a firewall I have. It doesn't matter what kind of anti-malware. I'll have the same rights and privileges and permissions that you have. And through the use of techniques such as spear phishing, an attacker can get inside your network and do a lot of damage and go and get out with a lot of information. I mean, look at, for example, what happened with the law firm here in Panama that was famously, because of the Panama Papers. According to a lot of studies, it takes an average of close to 200 days for a company to realize that there has been a breach. Mm-hmm. So enterprises should invest in reporting, auditing, and real-time tools that can help them know, when something weird is going on. You may have noticed when you purchase things online, for example, that they'll say, hey, wait a minute, you're in Panama. I don't know you that much. Let's make you jump through this additional hoop just to make sure you're not, using your credit card in a fraudulent way or whatever. That's kind of a little bit of what some of these enterprise tools do. For example, let's say you log on from your home because you're working from home, as many people are. But then all of a sudden, your IP address changes to somewhere in Costa Rica or some other country and not Panama. A smart enterprise system will ask you to do things like authenticate yourself again or use multi-factor authentication. Mm-hmm. Or if you log on at weird hours in the night, or if you log on the weekend, the best tools will even measure the time between the keystrokes when you're typing something and use that to kind of have a fingerprint of who you are and make sure that it's not that you gave your password to somebody else to have them log on in your name just to, pretend that you were working. So there's a lot of tools that companies can have to mitigate the risk, reduce the vulnerability, and also prepare for when it does happen. Because no matter how much protection you have, eventually something will fail. Usually it's human error. Somebody, clicked on the wrong thing, did the wrong thing. Then you have to be able to recover. For example, a lot of big companies have different servers around the world that take care of identity. I mean, Facebook, for example, when they lost access to their network, they couldn't even leave their offices because everything was tied to their identity. You need to have a strategy to recover that functionality as soon as possible, even in the face of losing everything. There are tools available that can help you recover that in a matter of minutes instead of hours or days, which is what it usually takes. So it's all a matter of, on the user side, being careful not to click on anything that you don't know. Be aware of what's going on and what you're using your computers for and so on. Enabling multi-factor authentication on everything you can. And stop oversharing information on social media. There's a lot of it going around right now where there's a lot of cybercrime going around right now, which uses the power of social media to get inside enterprises. For example, somebody will say, hey, Jerry, I know you've worked with Grupo Grada. How are they as employers or whatever? What do you think? And, it sounds like a harmless question. And you'll say, well, yes, I've worked with our friend Alessio, and I know this and I know that, and they're a great place to work at, or something like that. And somebody will say, hey, thank you for all that information. Maybe I'll apply to get a job there. Here's a $50 Amazon card for you to enjoy, for helping me or whatever. And then you click on it and it asks you for information or whatever. And then you have a problem. I mean, this happens a lot. There's things like people will write to you pretending to be from another company. Hey, congrats on that new merger and acquisition or whatever. I'm from so-and-so company, with a made-up name that looks like, somebody you do business with. And they start a conversation, make you click on the wrong thing or provide more information than you should, and then use that for identity theft or for getting inside a conversation and saying, hey, Jerry, don't deposit the money on this account, deposit it on this other account or whatever. There's a lot that's going on that people need to be aware of, regarding their communications, how they use technology and so on. And with education, I think we can improve upon our chances of not having to deal with any of these cyber attacks directly ourselves. But we need to be prepared.
I mean, I've noticed a couple of things. Firstly, I noticed one of my bank accounts here now that it's not just a question of telling you when there's been a transaction. It actually tells me when I've logged on and onto the. So if somebody does get in, I'm gonna know about it fairly quickly, although it's highly unlikely they would do. But the other thing I was going to was, oh yeah, does it help? For instance, my primary means of holding all my files. Now, actually, I had this conversation the other day with Christina. Although I have my files on my computer, what I do is my main filing system is Dropbox. Mm-hmm. That's where I sort of keep everything. Is it more beneficial for me? Because if anybody does sort of get to my files and does anything with them, it's going to be reported to me by Dropbox, because it's going to give every time you move something, every time you change something, it comes up on your Dropbox.
It's definitely important to have a service, whether it's Dropbox or anything else, that tells you every time there's a change that could affect you in any way. And in enterprises, that includes, for example, when somebody logs in, when they log out, when they change a file, when they delete a file. It's always important to have that. But it's also important to have offline secure backups that you can get to in case there's a problem. Let's say somebody cyber attacked Dropbox, and that same day you were hit with ransomware. You would have to go back to the couple of hard drives you have in a drawer somewhere in the studio and get some files off of there. So it's always important to have an offline secure copy of your information that you can get to, even in case, something happens to your cloud provider. It's not a bad idea to have an offline copy for those cases. If you do have an offline copy, I would recommend keep in mind a couple of things. First of all, hard drives have a limited lifespan, usually between 3 and 5 years. Anything you get out of, beyond that is like a bonus. They do wear out more quickly if they are being used. They wear out less quickly if they're not being used. So the one in your drawer will probably last a couple of years without any issues or whatever. But if you have external drives that you use for backup, it's not a bad idea to every 2 or 3 years or so make a backup of them on a new drive and then store that drive in a cool drive place somewhere that's safe. Also, if you're going to use solid state storage or USB drives or anything that's flash related, try to keep it out of direct sunlight or where it might be getting too warm. Okay. The way that it stores information is pretty sturdy. I mean, you've probably, had a case where one of those USB drives winds up in the wash and nothing happens to it or whatever. They're pretty resilient. But the way they store information is by capturing electrons in very specific flash memory modules, and high temperatures can let those electrons loose. And, if you store a USB drive like in your car dash or whatever, where it's getting hot all the time, it might not even last a year. So be careful with that. And they also have a limited lifespan in the amount of times you can write them. So if you've used a USB drive for like over a year and you've been reading and writing files all over it all the time, it's not a bad idea to consider using it as just a backup and then storing it somewhere and then getting a new one. They're getting cheaper all the time. And it's good to have fresh copies.
What's the chance of cyber attacks against cryptocurrency?
They usually have to do with either a cyber attack on an exchange. And that's one of the things that I tell people. If you have any significant amount of money in an exchange, then your money is as safe as the exchange is. There are a lot of exchanges.
There was a case with an exchange being hit not so long ago, wasn't
there? Several exchanges have been hit. Some of the exchanges, what they're doing right now in order to protect themselves is to do what's called cold storage, which is you take your cryptocurrency and you put it in a physical hardware based device wallet, like a hard drive, basically. And then you store that offline so it can't be reached by, anybody else. You can do that with your cryptocurrency as well and only put stuff in an exchange because you need to trade it for something else, maybe another cryptocurrency or for fiat money. But a lot of the times people will only store what they need for their daily transactions or whatever in that, and then keep everything in a cold storage wallet. Also, keep backups of your cold storage wallet, because if you lose it, then it's, what's happened before with some people. I mean, everybody's heard the stories of people with 10,000 Bitcoins in a hard drive that's in a landfill somewhere. So yeah, you have to be careful about that. If you value, if you have a lot of money invested in crypto, think about getting a hardware wallet and not having so much of it in an exchange at any time, because you're only as secure as the exchange. But if you do have to keep money in exchange, make sure it's a safe one. I use Binance. There's a lot of people that use other exchanges as well. I don't have that much money invested or used in wallets or whatever, but I feel safe enough in the level of risk that I have, having that in Binance, because it's not that much money. But again, this is kind of a risk decision that has to be made individually by each person.
Okay, and just to remind everybody, we've been announcing it over the last, all this week. There is a talk on Saturday from 5 until 8 p.m. It's called Crypto, and it's, say, this coming Saturday, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. It's going to be at the Emotions Dinner Theatre. It's on the 5th floor of the Mirage Casino. Go into the Mirage Casino, go up to the 5th floor. It starts at 5, okay? Special guest speaking, Tone Vase, and Geoff Paradise will be talking about. If you remember rightly, a few weeks ago, we had Geoff Paradise here in the studio, and for the first time ever, he spoke in a language which was understandable, and he is a big investor in cryptocurrencies, so you'll be talking to somebody who's got a lot of experience. So that's at the Emotions Dinner Theatre on Saturday, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. There's an open bar as well if you want that, for $30 till 7 p.m. And if you want to make a reservation, give a call on 6999 5245. 6999 5245. That's finding out a bit more about crypto. Speak to the people that actually have it. A bit more than Alex.
A lot more. I don't have that much.
So that's, but really in a way that's relatively safe. There's no, but they can't sort of do a big hit on, like you say, probably be on an exchange.
Oh, they can, and they do. That's why you should choose your exchange wisely. And as I said, if you have any significant amount of money, keep it in a cold wallet that you have control over, because then it's your money. Otherwise, you've probably used currency exchange services at one point or another, getting euros for dollars or things like that. You wouldn't store your money at a currency exchange.
No.
Exactly. So if you have any serious amounts of money in cryptocurrency, I think it's a good, safe idea to have them in cold storage that you control, and only transfer it over to an exchange when you actually need to exchange it, or to use any of the exchanges services. Some cryptocurrency exchanges have their own internal banking or investment options or whatever. You can also choose to do something like that, but then they are responsible for your money and they have to give it back in case there's a problem. Also look into how they're insured or who runs them. There are certain red flags that you can look at and say, you know what, this is not for me or whatever. But most cryptocurrency exchanges, the good ones or at least, are very transparent about where they're located, how they do business, who their different executives are. And it's a good idea to, if you're taking advice from, for cryptocurrency or dealing with cryptocurrency or whatever, look at the guy's name and the word scam on Google. And you can probably find out if they're into anything fishy. So I would recommend that as well.
And tell me, cryptocurrency is only any good if you have internet. Now, what's happened in Ukraine, if you're in Ukraine right now, for instance, a lot of the information they're getting it from terrestrial radio because they don't have access.
Yeah. Fortunately, they've also got access to some satellite internet connections. I
Mm.
believe Elon Musk also sent them over some Starlink satellite links. So yeah, there is a need for connectivity when you're dealing with anything that has to do with digital money. So yeah, but there are ways to trade and do things without a direct internet connection. It's not as easy, but yeah, one of the things that you need for uh, cryptocurrency to work at its best is some internet connections. So it's
Could those
Mhm.
links, for instance, could somebody, what we're seeing, of course, in Russia right now, is that access to websites and whatever is just completely blocked. They've got complete control. Can somebody block you from getting at your money?
Potentially they could. That being said, if you have a hardware wallet that you have it with you, if you have a cold storage wallet,
Mm,
then you have it with you, so they can't block you from it.
right.
They could block you from trading if you don't have an internet connection. But nowadays, if you do need an internet connection, there are so many ways to get it, like using, for example, satellite connections, cell phone connections.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Just keep an eye on the dollar. But that's an interesting. I had this discussion actually. They're now talking, aren't they, about making a digital dollar in the United States now. So,
Mhm.
but the dollar is digital, isn't it?
It has been for quite a while.
Uh-huh.
It would just make it more, I would say, more transparent, perhaps, or more prepared for being digital. Right now, there's a whole lot of shortcomings with the way that money is being handled digitally in general, and I think that what they want to do right now, which is establish what the rules will be and have a level playing field. I think it's a good idea. I hope they don't over-regulate or overreach, but it's a good thing to have, basic rules, because otherwise it
Mm.
becomes kind of a Wild West situation where there can be a lot of scams going around and people, doing all sorts of shady things, which is what we want to avoid.
All right. So just be careful. Be careful what you're doing, and say just keep watching this space. But say it's not so much because somebody was asking about these cyber attacks. Well, cyber attacks would normally be against large institutions. They would be against infrastructure, and although wouldn't necessarily they wouldn't put a cyber attack onto your personal computer, what they do attack could have effects on how you do business, how you access different things on the internet. So we all need to be aware of it. Keep an eye out for scams. Mary Lou dropped me a line. She says, I receive tons of these sort of, I guess, these spam emails, and I just block and delete. But one thing I found is, I don't know, because I guess it's corporate. I don't know if you can do it as an individual, Alex, but all my email goes through Google, through the Google service. I don't get spam.
Well, I get like very little spam. I think
Yeah.
one or two a week, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it gets filtered. In fact, I have to sometimes fish out stuff from the spam box,
Yeah.
and I try to help companies avoid the spam box by, tweaking their mail settings a little bit here and there to make sure that it doesn't wind up in the spam box. There's
Mm-hmm.
a whole bunch of things that people do with their emails, like fill them up with graphics and whatever that sometimes can be misconstrued as spam by Google and others. So there's a whole bunch of things we can do to improve that as well.
I did check my spam for some reason. I went and checked my spam box about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I had about 4 messages from the DGI in there,
Oh, oh well. We're
which
going to
is
have
where
to talk to our friend
which
Julio and
they
help
they'd ended
them
they'd ended up in the
improve
right
that.
place. So anyway, Alex, as always, thank you so very much,
Great to
and
be here.
I am glad to hear business is good. Keep it up, and
Thank you.
well, all being well, if you can, we'll speak to you next week.
See you next week.
All right, there we go. Dr. Computer Alex Newman with us here on this morning's Breakfast Show as we make our way